My name is Ellen Hartley, and the morning I opened my credit card statement, I felt my entire world tilt because staring back at me wasn't a small charge or a careless mistake. It was a bill for $63,000 in jewelry and a luxury Caribbean trip I had never booked. And before I could even process the shock, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother-in-law. I loved those gifts, daughter-in-law. In that moment, something inside me went very still, like a pond frozen overnight. I didn't scream. I didn't call her. I just stared at those words, knowing something very old inside me had snapped for the last time. Until that morning, I had lived my entire married life believing that civility and patience were the glue that held families together. But as I sat at my small oak kitchen table with my reading glasses halfway down my nose, I felt the truth settle on me, heavier than the Indiana winter outside the window. Someone I had treated with respect, someone who should have stood beside me as family, had robbed me clean. But before I tell you what I did next, I need you to understand how we got here. Because stories like mine don't begin with a single moment of betrayal. They build quietly, year after year, behind polite smiles and Sunday dinners. That morning started as any other. I had just brewed my usual cup of hazelnut coffee, the kind my husband Mark always said made the house smell like Christmas. I remember the sunlight coming through the blinds in long golden stripes. It should have been a peaceful morning. It was, until I clicked into my online banking. At first I thought the page glitched. I blinked twice. Then I leaned closer. $8 $400 fine jewelry boutique Indianapolis. $12,600 Diamond Legacy Jewelers. $42,000 Caribbean Elegance Travel Resort Package. I felt my pulse thud, slow and heavy, like footsteps down a hallway. The charges weren't random. They were deliberate, timed, over 2 days, all using my card that never left my purse. Mark was still sleeping, and I didn't want to wake him. He'd just had knee surgery, and the pain meds left him groggy. So I quietly moved through the house, gathering receipts from the past week to make sure nothing else was wrong. For years, I had been the keeper of our finances, not because Mark couldn't do it, but because numbers steadied me. They gave our life structure, predictability. But nothing about this was predictable. And then my phone chimed. I remember the exact feeling of dread before I picked it up, and the thin, polite text glowing on the screen. I love those gifts, daughter-in-law. A smiley face. She even added a smiley face. I sat down so fast, the chair legs screeched across the tile. My mother-in-law, Sandra Hartley, 71, retired church fundraiser, beloved by her bridge club, and longtime self-appointed matriarch of family decorum, had not only taken my credit card, she was bragging about it. I read the text again slower this time. There was no apology, no explanation, no accidental tone, just entitlement wrapped in chirpy punctuation. Suddenly, old memories flooded in, not dramatic ones, but small, stinging ones that built up over 30 years of marriage. The time she borrowed my grandmother's brooch and never returned it. The time she told our son that Mark had married beneath his station. The countless snide comments whispered behind napkins at family gatherings. But this wasn't petty cruelty. This was a crime, and she knew it. She knew what she had done. I didn't reply. Instead, I held the phone in both hands and breathed, trying to calm the heat that rose up my neck. Anger wasn't something that came naturally to women my age. We were raised to smooth conflict, not create it. But the silence in my kitchen felt like a verdict handing itself down. As I sat there, I realized something else. Sandra must have gotten my card while visiting 2 weeks earlier. She had offered to help bring in groceries from the car. My purse had been open on the counter. It would have taken her 2 seconds to slip the card out, take a photo, and slide it back. Cold, calculated, quiet. A style of warfare I knew too well. I finally opened my laptop and started documenting everything: dates, times the text message, screenshots of the charges, even photos of my purse in its usual spot. I didn't know exactly what I was preparing for, but I knew one thing. I wasn't letting this go. The next step came almost automatically. I called the credit card company. The representative, a woman named Karen, with the kind of soothing voice older customers loved, asked, "Do you recognize these purchases, ma'am?" "No," I said, "and I believe the person who made them is a family member." Karen's tone shifted instantly, more serious, more deliberate. She explained protocols, fraud procedures, and the importance of filing a police report if the thief was known. Known. The word hit hard. I thanked her, hung up, and closed my eyes for a moment. Was I really going to report my mother-in-law? Was I ready for that kind of family earthquake? A lifetime of conditioning told me to forgive, quietly sweep the issue under the rug, keep the peace for the sake of appearances. But then I imagined myself at 70, still being taken advantage of, still bending to make a woman like Sandra comfortable. And something inside me whispered firmly, "No more." I opened my eyes, feeling steadier now. I placed my evidence folder on the counter, smoothing its edges like it was something fragile and precious. This wasn't revenge. This was self-respect, and the beginning of accountability for the first time in our family. Outside, the February wind rattled the bare branches, like bones tapping a window. Inside, the house felt warm, still almost ceremonial, as if it knew a storm was coming and approved. I looked down at my phone one last time. Her message was still there, cheerful and smug. I didn't delete it. I didn't respond. I just whispered to myself, "She used the wrong card, and she picked the wrong woman." I didn't sleep much that night, not because of fear, but because memories kept drifting in small, sharp moments that suddenly looked different under the light of what Sandra had done. When dawn finally came, the sky outside our Indiana home was a dull gray, the kind that makes everything feel heavier. I brewed coffee and sat quietly at the kitchen table, letting the steam warm my hands as I prepared myself to revisit the past with new eyes. People always assume big family betrayals come out of nowhere, like lightning hitting a tree. But in truth, they grow slowly, fed by years of small slights, untreated wounds, and unspoken resentments. Sandra's theft wasn't a sudden storm. It was the inevitable breaking point of a dam that had been cracking for decades. I met Sandra for the first time 32 years ago. Mark and I had only been dating 6 months when he brought me to his mother's house, a tidy brick colonial with pink azaleas along the walkway. I remember smoothing my skirt nervously as we walked up. I had grown up in a working-class home outside Muncie. Sandra's house felt like something out of a magazine. Sandra greeted me with a smile, so polished it almost gleamed. But her eyes, sharp assessing, told the real story. She took my coat, looked me up and down, and said, "Well, Mark has certainly broadened his horizons." I didn't know what she meant then. I know now. Sandra had always believed her son deserved someone refined, someone from her church circle with old money and a proper pedigree, not a girl whose father repaired lawnmowers in the garage. But Mark loved me, and she couldn't change that. So instead, she chose a lifelong campaign of subtle sabotage. Over the years, she would say things like, I suppose you try your best in the kitchen. Mark used to be so trim. Marriage must be filling. You keep a tidy home for someone without a homemaker's upbringing. And every time I swallowed it, because that's what good daughters-in-law were taught to do. Because Mark would sigh and say Mom doesn't mean anything by it. Because I believed being gracious was the right thing. But being gracious without boundaries is something predators smell like perfume. One moment that stands out years before the credit card theft was the Christmas Mark's grandmother passed down her set of sapphire earrings, the family heirloom. Sandra looked at me, smiled, and said, "These should stay with the Hartley bloodline," and handed them to Mark's sister-in-law instead. I never said a word. Another memory, our son's graduation party. I spent weeks planning cooking, setting everything up. Sandra walked in, glanced around, and said loudly enough for half the guests to hear, "Well, Ellen tried. Let's appreciate the effort." Tried. That word lived in my bones for years. Then there was the brooch. My grandmother's brooch, one of the few things of sentimental value I owned. Sandra admired it during a family dinner and asked if she could borrow it for a church event. I lent it without hesitation. I never saw it again. When I gently asked about it months later, she said, "Oh dear, I assumed you gave it to me. You don't want it back, do you?" And even though I did, desperately, I heard myself say, "If it makes you happy, keep it." A lifetime of bending, a lifetime of making myself smaller, a lifetime of prioritizing peace over fairness. And now, she had stolen $63,000 and bragged about it through a text message, decorated with a smiley face. As I sat sipping coffee, my phone buzzed with Mark's alarm. He shuffled into the kitchen a few minutes later, still stiff from his knee surgery, wearing the old robe I'd mended twice. "You're up early," he said, pouring himself a cup. I hesitated, then slid the printed statement across the table. "We need to talk." He studied the page, blinking, then frowned deeply. "This isn't real, right? This can't be real." "It's real," I said softly. He looked at the charges again, then at me. "Who would?" My silence answered the question. His face changed, not anger at first, but confusion, then embarrassment, then a heaviness I had seen only a few times in our marriage. He rubbed his temples. "Mom, why would she?" "I don't know," I said, "but she did." Mark exhaled shakily and picked up my phone. He read the text message twice. His shoulders slumped. "I'm so sorry, Ellen." It broke my heart a little, seeing him take responsibility for something he didn't do, something he couldn't have prevented. "I need to call her," he said finally. "You don't have to," I replied quickly. A part of me wanted to protect him from the inevitable fallout, but Mark shook his head. "I do. She needs to hear this from me." He dialed Sandra on speaker. She answered on the third ring, cheery as ever. "Hello, sweetheart. Did Ellen tell you about her generous gifts?" Mark closed his eyes, as if bracing for impact. "Mom," he said slowly, "those were unauthorized charges. You used her card." There was a pause. Then Sandra laughed, a high-pitched, incredulous sound. "Unauthorized. Oh, Mark, don't be silly. Ellen always pretends she's private about money, but she said I could treat myself." "I never said that," I said, leaning toward the phone. Sandra's tone sharpened instantly. "Well, maybe you don't remember. You're at that age, dear." Mark's jaw tightened. "Mom, this is serious. There's $63,000 missing." Another pause, longer this time. Then Sandra's voice dropped to a low hiss. "Mark, she's trying to turn you against me. I knew she'd do this eventually." And there it was, the shift. The accusation, the manipulative twist I had seen 100 times, but had never challenged. Mark's voice cracked. "Mom, I'm not choosing sides. I'm stating facts." Sandra hung up. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence. Mark stared at the phone for a long time, before whispering, "I don't know who she is anymore." I reached for his hand. Maybe this is who she always was. We just didn't want to see it. He nodded slowly, pain etched across his face. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the evidence folder on the table. "I'm going to protect us." Because for the first time in my life, I realized something powerful. Keeping the peace had allowed the problem to grow. Now it was time to stop shrinking myself to fit her comfort, and start standing up for me, for Mark, and for the life we built together. The day after Mark confronted his mother, the house felt unusually quiet, as if it were waiting to see what I would do next. I woke up early, before the sun had fully climbed over the maple trees lining our street, and made myself a cup of chamomile tea. I knew I needed a clear head. What came next wouldn't be easy. It never is when family and justice collide. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I had first opened the credit card statement, and pulled the evidence folder toward me. The manila edges were crisp, untouched, except for the neat label I had written the night before: unauthorized charges. Documentation. The old Ellen, the one who always smoothed tension, who kept her voice soft, who gave second and third and 10th chances, might have hesitated. She might have convinced herself that confronting Sandra would upset the family, that calling the police would stir up drama, that forgiveness should come before boundaries. But this Ellen, the one who had been quietly pushed for decades, felt something new rising inside her resolve. I opened the folder. Inside were the printed statements, the screenshots, the timestamps of Sandra's text message, and even a note I wrote about the day she had visited and helped carry groceries, when she likely slipped the card from my purse, snapped a picture, and returned it without a sound. Every detail mattered. Every moment built a trail. I wasn't planning revenge. I was gathering truth. And truth, when finally spoken aloud, has a way of rearranging a family tree. My first call was to the credit card company again. A different representative answered, a polite young man named Charles, who sounded like he could still be in college. He reviewed my case and said, "Mrs. Hartley, because the charges exceed $50,000 and the suspected user is known to you, your next step is to file a report with local law enforcement. This will help us proceed with the fraud reversal." His voice was calm. Mine was steady when I thanked him. After the call, I sat there for a long minute, staring at nothing in particular. Filing a report meant accepting what Sandra had done. It meant letting the law take its course. It meant turning a private wound into a public case. It also meant reclaiming my dignity. Mark shuffled into the kitchen shortly after, still favoring his knee. He looked tired emotionally, more than physically. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Not much," I admitted. He sat down beside me. "Mom hasn't called back." I expected as much. Sandra had a particular talent for disappearing when accountability came too close, resurfacing later, with a revised version of events that made her the victim. The pattern was predictable. "I'm going to file the report today," I said quietly. Mark nodded slowly. "Do you want me to come with you?" The truth was, part of me did. But he was still healing, and I knew how torn he felt. This wasn't a burden he needed to carry physically. "I'll be okay," I said. "I think this is something I need to do on my own." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, Ellen." I didn't realize how much I needed those words until they landed. After breakfast, I dressed simply jeans, a soft blue sweater the necklace Mark gave me for our 20th anniversary. I wanted to feel grounded, not armored. The drive to the police station was quiet, the winter sky sagging heavy with the threat of snow. Inside the station smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. A young officer at the front desk introduced himself as Officer Ramirez. His demeanor was professional, but kind, the sort of person who knows how to soften difficult moments without dismissing their seriousness. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" I took a deep breath. "I need to file a report for financial fraud. The person who used my credit card is a family member." He didn't react with shock or judgment. Instead, he nodded with understanding, as though he'd heard this kind of story more often than people realized. "Let's step into one of our small rooms so you can speak comfortably." The privacy helped. I laid out the entire timeline: when the card was taken, when the charges appeared, the text message Sandra sent. I handed him the folder. He reviewed it carefully, his brow furrowing, not in confusion, but in confirmation. "You've documented everything thoroughly," he said. "This is exactly what we need to move forward." Part of me felt embarrassed that my family drama had spilled into a public office, into official paperwork and legal procedures. But another part felt something like pride, quiet, earned pride. For once, I wasn't shrinking myself for someone else's comfort. Officer Ramirez asked a few follow-up questions. Did I authorize anyone to use the card or no? Did Sandra have a history of taking items or money? Yes, though never to this extent. Did I feel threatened? Not physically, but emotionally strained for years. When we finished, he closed the file. "We'll open a formal investigation. Someone will contact you within a few days." I nodded. "Thank you." As I turned to leave, he added something gentle. "I know it's hard when these situations involve family, but you did the right thing." I held on to those words as I stepped back out into the cold. The drive home felt different, lighter somehow. I knew things would get harder before they got better. Sandra wasn't the type to accept blame quietly. There would be phone calls, accusations, possibly tears. There would be gossip. There always is in towns like ours. But there would also be truth. And truth is a kind of cleansing, even when it stings first. When I walked through the front door, Mark looked up from the couch. His eyes searched mine. "Did you do it?" "I did." He nodded and exhaled, as if releasing a breath he'd been holding for years. "Good." We ate lunch together in comfortable silence, grilled turkey sandwiches and leftover soup. Simple food, familiar, grounding. Afterward, Mark rested his leg while I organized the house. Sometimes mundane tasks are the best balm for big emotions. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I answered. "Mrs. Hartley, this is Detective Avery. I've just received the fraud report filed this morning. I'd like to discuss next steps with you." And just like that, the wheel of justice began turning. As I listened to the detective, one thing became clear. Sandra thought she had gotten away with something. She had no idea that the ground beneath her was already beginning to shift. Detective Avery's voice was steady, measured, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who has spent years navigating the messy middle ground between family loyalty and the law. As he spoke, I felt myself sit up a little taller, bracing for what came next. After all, this wasn't a neighborly dispute or a misunderstanding. This was a criminal matter, and Sandra, my mother-in-law, was at the center of it. "Mrs. Hartley," he began, "I've reviewed the documents you submitted at the station. Everything is clear, thorough, and consistent. What we need now is a formal statement from you and your husband, since he also confronted the suspect." I swallowed. "Of course. Whatever you need. We'll schedule a follow-up meeting. Meanwhile, do not contact her directly. Let us handle all communication." I thanked him, hung up, and sat in silence for a moment. The instructions were simple, reasonable, even yet, hearing them spoken aloud felt surreal. Do not contact her. Not because of family tension, but because she was now considered a suspect. When Mark came into the living room, using his cane for balance, he saw the look on my face, the detective. I nodded. "They're moving forward." He sat beside me, shoulders heavy. "Mom called me twice this morning." I didn't answer. I could tell that decision cost him something. Mark wasn't a man who ignored family, even when they hurt him. His heart was softer than mine, in some ways more forgiving. But even he knew that right now silence was the only safe place to stand. "Do you want me to call her back?" he asked, though there was no conviction in it. "No," I said gently, "not until we know where this is going." He nodded, relieved. By afternoon, the storm began, the family storm. It always comes when something like this surfaces, especially in small-town America, where news travels faster than the mail. The first call came from Mark's older sister, Judith. Her voice was sharp, already defensive. "Mark, what on earth is going on? Mom says you two are accusing her of stealing thousands of dollars." Mark put the call on speaker. We both listened. Judith continued louder. "Now, she's devastated. She said you blindsided her." Mark interrupted. "Judith, she stole Ellen's card. The bank confirmed it. There are charges." "She told me Ellen said she could use the card," Judith snapped. "Mom wouldn't lie." "She is lying," Mark replied quietly. There was a stunned pause. "You always take Ellen's side," Judith hissed, her voice cracking. "Mom's getting older. She needs compassion, not lawyers." I leaned forward and spoke clearly. Judith, compassion doesn't mean allowing someone to commit a crime. Judith hung up without another word. Mark stared at the phone, his jaw tight. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." "I know," I said softly, "but we can't let fear decide what's right." An hour later, the second wave hit the group text thread, one that had been dormant since Thanksgiving, lit up with messages from cousins, siblings, in-laws. Relatives we hadn't heard from in months were suddenly passionate commentators. "This is a misunderstanding. Why didn't you talk to her first? Ellen always overreacts. $60,000? That can't be right." Then a final message from Sandra herself. "I am being attacked by my own family. I didn't do anything wrong. Please pray for me." I felt my stomach turn. Mark closed the thread without responding. "She's making herself the victim." "She always has," I said quietly. By evening, the house felt unbearably small, as if the walls were absorbing every word, every accusation. I tried folding laundry, but my hands shook. I tried watering the plants, but my mind was far away, lost in the storm of expectations placed on women my age. Keep the peace. Don't make a fuss. Let things go. Forgive and forget. Be gracious. Be patient. Be small. Be smaller. But I wasn't small anymore. After dinner, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, the kind of simple comfort food you rely on when the world feels too loud. Mark and I sat together in the living room. The fireplace flickered softly. For a moment, it felt like any normal winter night. Then Mark whispered, I feel like I'm losing my family." His voice cracked on the last word. I slid closer to him, taking his hand. "You're not losing your family. You're losing an illusion. Those who love us will stay. Those who don't, maybe they were never really with us." He nodded but didn't speak. After a while, he said, "I need to talk to her again. One more time. I need to hear her say it." I hesitated. "It's your decision. Just be ready for her to deny everything." He stood slowly, wincing as he shifted weight off his knee. "If I don't try, I'll regret it." He stepped into the hallway to call her. I stayed on the couch, listening to the muffled rhythm of his voice, steady, cautious hurt. Then louder. Sandra's shrill voice cut through the house, even from across the room. "How dare you accuse me? I am your mother." I closed my eyes. Sandra continued her words, sharp as ice. "If your wife hadn't kept such a messy purse, I wouldn't have mistaken her card for mine. Anyone could have done that." Mark's voice was strained. "Mom, that isn't what happened. Well, maybe I deserved something nice after everything I've done for this family." "It was $63,000, he said firmly. She scoffed. "Oh, please. You two have plenty. Don't pretend to be poor." I felt something twist in my chest. Finally, Mark said, "Mom, the police are involved now. I can't stop that." Silence. Then Sandra's voice dropped to a low, venomous whisper. "She did this. She's trying to destroy us." "She reported fraud," Mark said quietly. "Fraud you committed." And with that, Sandra hung up. No apology, no hesitation. Just the hard click of a door slamming shut. Mark returned to the living room and sank onto the couch exhausted. She didn't deny it, he said. She just justified it. I put my arm around him, letting him lean into me. The sun had fully set. The house was dark except for the warm glow from the fireplace. "This is the beginning," I said softly. "Not the end." He nodded slowly. "You're right." But I could see the pain in his eyes, the mourning of a son realizing for the first time who his mother really was. 2 days passed before we heard from the police again, though it felt longer. When you're waiting for justice, real justice, not the imagined kind whispered in family circles, you start noticing every small sound in the house, the mail slot clicking, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of old wooden floors. Everything feels like a sign, even when it isn't. On the third morning, as I stood at the sink rinsing breakfast dishes, my phone rang. The caller ID read Detective Avery. I dried my hands quickly. "Hello, this is Ellen." "Mrs. Hartley," he said, "I wanted to update you. We've contacted the jewelry stores and the travel agency. They've already confirmed the purchases were made using the card number associated with your account. There's also store footage." My heart thudded. "Footage?" "Yes," he replied. "Your mother-in-law appears on camera at both jewelry stores, selecting items and presenting the card information she had written on a slip of paper. That confirms intent." Intent, a powerful word in legal terms, a terrible one in family terms. Detective Avery continued. The travel agency provided copies of the confirmation emails. They were sent to an address connected to her phone number. So she hadn't even tried to hide it. She believed she was untouchable. Next, he said we'll be contacting her for an interview. It's best that you and your husband do not speak to her or anyone acting on her behalf. I thanked him, though the words felt small in comparison to the weight of what he carried. After the call, I sat down at the kitchen table and let myself feel everything, the relief, the sadness, the sense of inevitability. Justice was moving forward, but so was the fracture of a family that had always looked solid from the outside. Mark limped into the kitchen a few minutes later. Who was that? The detective. They have footage. They're interviewing her soon. Mark closed his eyes, running a hand through his thinning hair. She's not going to take that well. No, I said softly, but the truth rarely arrives politely. By afternoon, the ripple spread. The first tremor came from Judith again. She sent a long text message filled with dramatic punctuation and accusations. I cannot believe you two would humiliate our mother like this. She said the police called her. She's crying nonstop. You caused this. Ellen, you've always had it out for her. I didn't respond. Responding would have given the message oxygen. And I had learned slowly and painfully that silence is sometimes stronger than any argument. But Mark typed back simply, Mom committed fraud. We're not discussing this further. Almost immediately, Judith fired back, I hope you're happy. This could ruin her reputation. Mark stared at the screen for a long moment before locking his phone. She cares more about Mom's reputation than what Mom did to you. I gently touched his arm. Some people cling to illusions. Let her have hers. The second tremor came that evening, a voicemail from a number we didn't recognize. When Mark played it on speaker, we heard Sandra's shaky voice. Mark, I don't understand why you're doing this. The police said they have evidence. I don't know what they think they saw, but I did nothing wrong. Your wife, she's twisting things. I've always loved you. Always. Please call me. I closed my eyes. The performance was familiar. The trembling voice, the selective memory, the implication that I was orchestrating a grand betrayal. It was the same tactic she used whenever accountability knocked on her door. Pretend innocence, then point the finger elsewhere. Mark deleted the message. I can't listen to her lie anymore, he said quietly. The next morning brought the real shock. Detective Avery called again. Mrs. Hartley, we completed the interview with your mother-in-law. My breath caught. How did she respond? She denied everything he said calmly. However, her statements were inconsistent, and when confronted with the footage, she changed her explanation 3 times. 3 times. That told me everything. He continued, We're moving forward with charges. Given the amount of money and the evidence collected, it qualifies as felony theft and credit card fraud. I didn't speak right away. Even when you expect something, hearing it confirmed can shake the ground under your feet. Will she be arrested? I finally asked. It depends, he said. The judge may issue a summons first. But yes, this is a criminal matter now. After the call, I sat on the edge of the couch, letting the quiet of the house surround me. Mark joined me and sat beside me without asking. What happens now? He whispered. Everything changes, I said honestly. He nodded, rubbing his knees. She thinks she's the victim. She always has, I said. But now the law will decide. 2 days later, the official letter arrived by mail, a white envelope stamped with the county court seal. Inside was a formal notice of charges filed against Sandra, fraudulent use of a credit card theft, over $50,000, and misrepresentation of identity for financial gain. Mark stared at the document for a long time. I can't believe it came to this. But I could. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was decades of entitlement finally being called what it was. Wrong. That evening, Mark tried calling his mother again, one last attempt to speak rationally before the legal process took full control. I watched him pace the living room phone, pressed to his ear. When she finally answered, her voice was cold as stone. I hope you're proud, she snapped. You've let your wife destroy our family. Mom, Mark said gently, nobody destroyed anything. You stole Ellen's card. I borrowed it, she shrieked. A simple mistake. You wrote the number down, Mark said, trying to stay calm. You made multiple purchases. You lied. I deserve nice things, she cried. After everything I've done for you, you let her turn you against me. Mark closed his eyes. You turned me away. You did this. Sandra's voice dropped to a hiss. I won't forget this, Mark. You chose her. You betrayed me. Then she hung up. Mark lowered the phone slowly, as if it weighed 100 pounds. She's gone, he whispered. Not physically, but the mother I thought I had. She's gone. I wrapped my arms around him. No, I murmured. She was gone a long time ago. You're just seeing clearly now. He let out a shaky breath. This isn't the end, I added softly. It's the unraveling, and unraveling is the first step toward rebuilding. But neither of us knew then just how far the unraveling would go. The week that followed felt like someone had lifted the edges of our lives and shaken everything loose. Nothing sat where it used to, old assumptions, old loyalties, old illusions. Even the house felt different, as if it had been holding its breath for years and was finally exhaling. On Thursday morning, a soft knock came at our door. Not a pounding, not an urgent rap, just a polite knock. The kind people use when they don't want to alarm the neighbors. Mark answered it. I heard a man's voice, firm but courteous. Mr. Hartley, I'm here to deliver a summons for Sandra Hartley. Mark's shoulders slumped as he accepted the envelope. She doesn't live here. That's all right, the man replied. You're listed as her emergency contact. She'll need to report to the county courthouse on Monday. When Mark closed the door, he held the envelope with a strange mix of dread and relief. It's official now, he said. It had been official long before, but I knew what he meant. Something about the crisp paper, the state seal, the formal language. There was no more pretending this was a family squabble, no more minimizing, no more misunderstandings. This was now a legal chain reaction that no amount of denial or finger-pointing could stop. I put a hand on his arm. We'll face it together. He nodded, though his eyes were distant. That afternoon, Sandra called. Not Mark, not me. She called our landline, the one nobody used except for spam calls and the occasional dentist reminder. When the phone rang, both of us stared at it like it was a snake that had slithered into the kitchen. Mark reached for it first. Don't I whispered. He paused. But curiosity mixed with decades of habit won. He lifted the receiver and held it between us. Hello, he said cautiously. Sandra's voice came through brittle and hardened. So, they served you too. Do you feel good about yourself now? Mark stayed calm. Mom, this isn't about feeling good. This is about what you did. What I did, she snapped. You've let that woman turn you against your own mother. I spoke then. Sandra, you stole my credit card. The line went silent. Then Sandra hissed, You ungrateful girl. Everything I've done for this family. You didn't do this for the family, I said quietly. You did it because you wanted what you wanted, and you didn't care who paid the price. A sharp inhale crackled through the receiver. You ruined everything, she whispered. You'll regret this. And then she hung up. Mark set the receiver down and rubbed his forehead. She's spiraling. She's scared, I said. Her whole life she's used guilt and charm to get her way, but none of that works on the law. She's still my mother, he whispered, almost to himself. I put my hand over his. And you're still allowed to feel sad, but sadness doesn't make wrong things right. He nodded slowly. 2 days later, Detective Avery called again. "Mrs. Hartley, we've completed our evidence review. Based on the footage financial records and her changing statements, the judge has approved moving the case forward. She'll be assigned a public defender unless she hires her own attorney." I exhaled, feeling both lifted and strangely heavy. "Is there any chance this ends without a trial?" I asked. "It depends on her," he said. "If she admits guilt, it could move to a plea deal. If she denies everything, it may go to court." After I hung up, I looked at Mark. "It's starting." He nodded. It was already started. That evening, the doorbell rang. Standing on our porch was Sandra. Her hair was disheveled, her coat buttoned wrong, her eyes puffy from crying. For the first time in decades, she didn't look like the polished, poised matriarch of the Hartley clan. She looked small. "Mark," she said, her voice cracking, "please, I can't lose you." Mark froze. I stepped to his side, not blocking him, not shielding him, just standing with him. Sandra looked at me, and her face twisted. You did this." I didn't respond. It wouldn't have mattered. She looked back at Mark. "You're my son. She's just—" "No," Mark said, his voice quiet but firm. "She's my wife, the woman who has stood beside me for 30 years, the woman you've hurt for just as long." Sandra's mouth fell open. Mark continued. "You stole from her. You lied. You involved us in something criminal. This isn't about choosing between you and her. This is about choosing what's right." Sandra stepped back as if struck. Her lower lip trembled. For a moment, I thought I saw something soften, an apology, trying to claw its way out. But it didn't come. Instead, she whispered, "You'll regret this," turned sharply, and walked away, swaying slightly as she made her way to her car. When her taillights disappeared, Mark closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. "That was the hardest thing I've ever done," he whispered. I know, I said, touching his hand, but it was also the bravest. Monday came. Sandra arrived at the courthouse with her sister, both dressed in somber gray coats, like widows in a family tragedy. She didn't look at us, not once. She kept her chin, lifted her expression, proud, as if she were the one bringing charges instead of answering to them. The hearing was brief. Charges were read aloud. Sandra's voice wavered only once when the judge said, "Theft exceeding $50,000. But she pleaded not guilty. Of course she did. Afterward, as we exited the courthouse, a cold wind swept across the parking lot, carrying loose leaves and the distant sound of traffic. Mark stood beside me, his face pale. "She really thinks she did nothing wrong," he murmured. "No," I said softly. "She just can't accept that she got caught." He looked at me, eyes filled with both sorrow and clarity. "Everything has changed." "It needed to," I replied gently. We walked to the car, the cold biting at our cheeks. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something unexpected rising in me. Not anger, not fear. Strength. The kind that comes when truth finally stands taller than history. The weeks leading up to Sandra's final hearing moved slowly, like winter refusing to give way to spring. Even when the days began to grow lighter, the air in our home stayed heavy. There were moments when Mark stood by the kitchen window and stared out at the street, as if expecting his mother to pull up unannounced again. There were moments when I caught myself wondering whether things could have been different, if a conversation years ago might have softened her heart, or if stronger boundaries earlier in our marriage might have prevented all this. But the truth, the one I had spent my entire adult life avoiding, finally settled into place. You cannot save people who are committed to their own story, especially when that story casts them as the victim of every circumstance. One crisp Friday morning, the phone rang. It was Detective Avery. "Mrs. Hartley, he said your mother-in-law has accepted a plea agreement." "I wasn't expecting that. A plea?" "Yes." Her attorney advised her that with the amount of evidence and her previous statements, a jury trial would likely result in a harsher sentence. She will plead guilty to felony misuse of a credit card with probation restitution and mandatory financial counseling. I closed my eyes, not in relief exactly, but in acknowledgement. "And she will be required," he continued, "to reimburse the full amount charged to your account. The court will formalize everything next week." Mark was sitting across from me as I spoke. When I hung up, he looked at me with uncertainty. "What does this mean?" "It means she admitted it," I said quietly. "She finally admitted it." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. I don't know how to feel." "You don't have to know," I said gently. "You just have to let yourself feel whatever comes." He nodded. But beneath his grief, beneath his exhaustion, I saw something else taking root: acceptance. 2 days before the hearing, Sandra called. Not to apologize, not to make peace. She wasn't made of that kind of softness, but because she wanted something familiar, one last chance to rewrite the narrative in her own image. "Mark," she said when he answered, "I pled guilty, but it was only because they pressured me. You know, I didn't mean to do anything wrong." He listened quietly. I could see his jaw tightening. She continued, "I was confused. I thought the card was mine. Anyone could make a mistake." "That wasn't a mistake," Mark interrupted softly but firmly. "You wrote down her card number. You went to 2 stores. You booked a trip. You texted her about the gifts you bought for yourself." Silence. Then Sandra's tone shifted into something trembling and brittle. "So this is how my life ends alone." The words hung there sharp and manipulative. Mark's shoulders stiffened. "Mom, you're not alone because of us. You're alone because you hurt the people who loved you." Sandra inhaled sharply. "Your wife took everything from me." "No," he said calmly. "You took something that wasn't yours. And now you're facing the consequences." Another silence, then a whisper. "I don't know how to fix this." Mark swallowed. "Start by telling the truth, and then stop hurting people." She hung up without another word. He stood there for a long time, after phone still in his hand. Then he looked at me, eyes wet. "She's not capable of changing, is she?" I stepped toward him and rested my hand on his arm. "Some people aren't, but you did. You chose honesty over habit, courage over comfort." His voice cracked. "I never wanted it to end like this." "Neither did I said. "But endings aren't failures. They're turning points." See, the day of the hearing arrived, cold and gray. We sat in the courtroom, listening as the judge read the terms of Sandra's plea. She stood at the defense table, wearing a navy coat and pearls, trying hard to look composed. But her eyes betrayed her. They darted nervously, and she clutched her handbag like it might run away. When the judge asked her to confirm her plea, her voice wavered. "Yes, guilty." 2 small words, but they echoed through the room like a door closing. The judge ordered her to pay restitution, attend counseling, and remain on probation for 2 years. He spoke gently but firmly, emphasizing that financial crimes, even within families, carry serious consequences. Sandra didn't look at us, not once. When it was over, Mark and I stepped outside. The sun had broken through, for the first time in days, melting patches of old stubborn snow along the courthouse steps. He took a deep breath. "It's done." "No," I said softly. "It's beginning." He looked at me confused. I continued. "Now comes the rebuilding. Not with her, she has her own path. But for us, we get to choose what we carry forward." He nodded, and I saw something loosen in his posture, like he'd been carrying a weight for years he didn't realize he held. We drove home in quiet reflection. When we arrived, we made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and let the warmth of the house settle around us. It felt different now, lighter, more honest. After a long moment, Mark reached for my hand. "You know," he said, "I keep thinking about everything Mom did. Not just the card, the comments, the manipulation, the entitlement, and I realized something." "What?" "She never broke you." His voice softened. "You stayed kind. You stayed steady. You stayed you." My eyes warmed. "Kindness isn't weakness, Mark." "No," he said, "it's strength, and you prove that." I smiled, just a small one, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and steady. Later that evening, I stepped outside onto the porch. The air was crisp, and the neighborhood was calm, the kind of calm that comes only after you've weathered a storm and realize you're still standing. I thought about what had happened. Not the crime itself, but everything around it. The years of silence, the erosion of boundaries, the cost of shrinking yourself to keep someone else comfortable. And I understood the lesson. Justice isn't loud. It's not vengeful. It's not dramatic. It's steady. It's patient. It restores what was taken: dignity, clarity, truth. I turned back toward the door, ready to move forward. Because healing, once it begins, invites others to join it. And for anyone listening to my story now, anyone who has ever been diminished, manipulated, or made to feel small, I want to say this. You don't have to shout to reclaim your power. You don't have to fight fire with fire. You just have to stand up, even quietly, and say, "No more." Your boundaries matter. Your worth matters. Your peace matters. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk toward justice and trust that you deserve to be protected. If this story touched, you share it with someone who needs courage today. And if you'd like to hear more stories, like mine stories, of quiet strength, justice, and healing, I hope you'll stay with us.